50 years ago, a group of self-described revolutionaries did something that shocked the world. In just 2 years, they declared war on America, assassinated a beloved school superintendent, robbed several banks, bombed several police cars, murdered an innocent bystander, kidnapped heiress Patty Hearst and convinced her to join their cause before most of the group burned to death in a fiery shootout in Los Angeles, right on live television. This webcast is about everything that made that story possible, and almost none of it is what I expected to find when I started looking. I came to this project with a set of beliefs about the Symbionese Liberation Army and the era that produced them. I had to dismantle most of those beliefs before I could tell this story honestly. This is the story of who the SLA really were, what they actually believed, and what it tells us about a nation that is still grappling with the same failures that produced them. This is House on Fire, Patty Hearst, the SLA, and the Seduction of Revolution.
She was in the trunk of a car. She was wearing a robe. She had nothing on her feet. Her hands were bound, and a blanket was over her head, and the metal around her was cold, and the car was moving, and she had no way to know in which direction. She did not know where she was going. She did not know what was going to happen when she got there. She did not know if Stephen was alive. The car was taking a long route. She didn't know that either. Didn't know that the people who had taken her were avoiding the Bay Bridge, taking the longer San Mateo Bridge crossing, adding time to a journey that was already the longest of her life. What she knew was that the car kept moving and the darkness stayed complete and the cold didn't go away. She was whimpering in fear. At some point during the drive, a hand reached under the blanket and found hers. She was 19 years old. Someone had just beaten her fiancé on the floor of her apartment. Someone had dragged her down the stairs and out into the street, barefoot, and pushed her into a trunk and told her they would blow her head off if she made noise. And now in the dark, a hand was holding hers. She didn't know whose hand it was. She didn't know if it was the hand of someone who intended to kill her or someone who didn't. She didn't know what it meant. She held it anyway because it was the only human contact available, and she was in the trunk of a car in the dark, and her hands were bound, and she was terrified in a way that 19 years of living had not prepared her for and would not have prepared anyone for. The car drove on for more than an hour. The car stopped. Doors opened. Hands took hold of her, and she was moving again, out of the trunk, on her feet, being walked through darkness she still could not see. The blindfold was still on. Her feet found concrete, then grass, then a floor. She was inside somewhere. She could hear voices she could not place, and movement she could not track, and then a door opened in front of her. She smelled something, earthy, damp, close, and her mind went somewhere specific and immediate and terrible, a story she had read recently about a woman who had been buried alive. She thought that was what was happening to her now. She screamed over and over. She kicked. She fought against the hands holding her with everything she had left. A man's voice right beside her, flat and direct. It's a closet. Relax, it's just a closet. She was put inside. The door closed behind her. She heard a lock turn. Even through the blindfold, she could tell it was pitch black. The closet was 6 feet 7 inches long, a little more than 2 feet wide, and 8 feet high. A foam mattress had been cut to fit the floor, the source of the smell that had triggered her panic. There was nothing else in it. This was the people's jail that the SLA had been preparing for weeks. For Patricia, it was a box in the dark. She had no way to measure time, no light to track, no sounds from outside the house that would tell her what hour it was or how long she had been there. The radio someone placed inside, she didn't know when, couldn't say if it was minutes or hours after the door first closed, played at a volume that covered the sound of her presence in the house from anyone who might hear from outside. It also covered partially the sounds of the house from her. She was sealed in. At some point, the door opened. The radio was turned down. A man spoke. His voice was deliberate, unhurried, the voice of someone who had prepared what he was going to say and intended to say all of it. He told her she was in the custody of the Symbionese Liberation Army. He told her she had been arrested, not kidnapped, arrested by a combat unit of the SLA because her father was a corporate enemy of the people. She was a prisoner of war. She would be treated according to the Geneva Convention governing prisoners of war. Their comrades were being held in a prison, he said, and her condition in this closet would duplicate their situation exactly. If their situation changed for the worse, hers would change in exactly the same way. He also told her that she would not be mistreated unless she tried to escape. If she tried to escape, she would be executed. She asked one question: who is the Symbionese Liberation Army? And another voice, a woman's voice, angry and fierce, laughed and said, everybody knows the SLA. The SLA killed Marcus Foster. Then the door closed again. Patty sat in the dark. She had read about the murder of Marcus Foster. The people who kidnapped her were murderers. She curled into a fetal position and began weeping as silently as she could. Then, God knows how many minutes or hours later, the door opened again. And the lectures began. Hours of them. The inhumanity of the prison system, the plight of the oppressed, the evils of ruling class families like the Hearsts. The man's voice filled the closet with a worldview, detailed, internally consistent, delivered with absolute conviction that she had no other source to measure it against, no radio she controlled, no newspaper, no phone call, no Stephen, no mother, no friend. Only this voice and what it was telling her. She could receive it or she could not receive it. She could not escape it, and she could not check it against anything else. Between lectures, she was fed, simple food brought to the door. She was led to the bathroom blindfolded, guided by hands she could feel but not see, attached to people whose faces she could not make out in the dark. She was learning the house through sound, footsteps on different surfaces, the creak of a particular floorboard, the direction voices came from, how many there seemed to be. She could not be certain of any of it. The first time a woman opened the door, the quality of the interaction was different from the man's lectures. This voice had warmth in it, genuine, immediate warmth that was kind of disorienting because warmth was not what the closet had prepared her to receive. The woman brought water. Before handing it to Patricia, she said, I'll drink half first so you know it's okay. She left the door open and talked, not about ideology, not about revolution, but in the rambling personal way of someone who needed to talk as much as Patricia needed to listen. She talked mostly about her love for one of the men who was in prison. She said that was the only reason Patricia was here at all. She didn't care about politics, she just wanted him back. Patricia could not see her face clearly enough in the available light to describe her. She knew her voice. She knew the warmth in it. She knew the relief of the door being open and another person being present and the water being real. These were the coordinates of her world. On Benvenue Avenue, the Berkeley police had arrived to find Stephen Weed bleeding from head wounds on the floor of the apartment and no Patricia Hearst. Weed told them what he could. The neighbor who called police told them what she had seen. Other neighbors who had heard the screaming and come to their windows described figures on the street, cars pulling away, the chaos of the last minutes of the operation on the sidewalk in front of the building. None of it told the police where she had gone, but they did know who had taken Patty. Police found cyanide-tipped bullets in the apartment, deliberately left behind. The same ammunition modification that had been found in the body of Marcus Foster 3 months earlier. The connection was immediate and unambiguous. The Symbionese Liberation Army had kidnapped Patricia Hearst. They left their calling card. The FBI was notified. What would become the most resource-intensive manhunt in the Bureau's history to that point was initiated within hours. Agents began working the SLA's known associates, the Bay Area radical networks, the prison connections, the Venceremos remnants, every lead that the investigation of the Foster assassination had produced and not yet resolved. They had a name. They had almost nothing else. Randy Hearst was reached at his home and told that his daughter had been taken. He was a man who had spent his professional life controlling the way information reached the public. And now the most important information in his world, where his daughter was, whether she was alive, what was happening to her, was entirely beyond his reach. He had no way to know. Nobody had a way to know. Patricia was in a closet in a house in Daly City, 2 feet wide, pitch black, a foam mattress on the floor, and a radio playing to cover the sounds outside. A man's voice telling her about the Geneva Convention, and a woman's voice asking if the water was okay, and darkness that did not change, regardless of what time it was outside. She had been in that closet for hours. It felt like longer. On her 3rd day in the closet, the man with the authoritative voice told her that her formal interrogation was beginning. He handled it himself. The questions came in sequence: her upbringing, her education, her family's media holdings, the geography of the Hearst Empire. He wanted to know everything about the world she had come from. She told him. She answered every question. She had no framework in that closet for deciding what to withhold or from whom or why. It lasted for days. The people holding her had killed someone. They had done it with poisoned bullets and called it a revolutionary execution. She was in a closet in a house with those people, and the man with the authoritative voice was asking her questions about her family's newspaper holdings, and she answered them because what else was there to do? The communique arrived at KPFA 3 days after the kidnapping, Thursday, February 7th, forcing the Hearst family to endure nearly 3 full days of complete silence from their daughter's captors. It came in an envelope. Inside was the communique and Patricia's mobile oil credit card, issued in her father's name. The FBI read the communique and began working every lead they had, which was not many. The SLA was an organization they had not known existed 3 months ago. The Bay Area radical network was vast and largely underground. The house where Patricia was being held was in a suburb with no SLA connections in any file the Bureau possessed. The investigation was massive and largely without direction. The television in the house was turned to face the wall. The man in charge had decided that the government could use it to surveil them, could somehow watch through the screen. So the screen faced the wall, and Patricia had no access to it anyway, and the outside world reached the inside of that house only through what the people in it chose to bring in. What they brought in for Patricia was controlled. She heard what they decided she should hear. She was told what they decided she should know. The picture of the outside world that was being assembled for her in that closet was assembled entirely by the people holding her, and it had a consistent shape. She was chosen because her family was the enemy of the people. She was taken because she was needed to broker a release of two men that should not be in prison. She would be held to the same standards those men were held. What happened to them would happen to her. She had no way to check any of this. No radio she controlled, no newspaper, no phone, no voice from outside the house that had not been filtered through the people who lived in it. The information environment of her captivity was total and seamless. She was inside it with no exit. Patricia did not know that on the other side of the closet door, the SLA were trying to figure out what to do with her. She had been taken as a bargaining chip, but now they were trying to figure out how to use her beyond the release of the two men in San Quentin. And then on the 8th day of her captivity, February 12th, the man with the authoritative voice handed her a microphone attached to a reel-to-reel tape recorder. He didn't give her a script. He gave her instructions, paragraph by paragraph, and told her to say it in her own words. She recorded a message to her parents.
Mom, Dad, I'm okay. I'm with a combat unit that's armed with automatic weapons. I'm kept blindfolded, usually, so that I can't identify anyone. My hands are often tied, but they're not. And I'm not gagged or anything. I'm comfortable. I'm here because I'm a member of a ruling class family. I want to get out of here, but the only way I'm going to is if we do it their way. And I just hope that you'll do what they say, Dad, and just do it quickly. They're perfectly willing to die for what they're doing. I just hope I can get back to everybody really soon.
She was a prisoner of war, she said. She was being treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention. Whatever happened to the two men in San Quentin was going to happen to her. She said goodbye. The tape recorder was taken away. The closet door was closed again. She was still blindfolded for most of her waking hours. She still could not identify the faces of the people around her with any certainty. She still did not know exactly where she was. She was eating beans and black-eyed peas. Poor people's food, they called it, with pride. She did not know that her name was being reported on news outlets around the world. On February 12th, the tape arrived. Patricia's voice, and then another voice spoke. To those who would bear the hopes and future of our people, let the voice of their guns express the words of freedom. Greetings to the people, fellow comrades, brothers and sisters. My name is Sin Q, and to many and to my comrades, I am known as Sin. I am a Black man and representative of Black people. I hold the rank of General Field Marshal in the United Federated Forces of the Symbionese Liberation Army. Today, I have received an order from the Symbionese War Council, the Court of the People, to the effect that I am ordered to convey the following message on behalf of the SLA and to insert a taped word of comfort and verification that Patricia Campbell Hearst is alive and safe. The SLA has arrested the subject for the crimes that her mother and father have by their actions committed against we, the American people, and oppressed people of the world. Before any forms of negotiations for the release of the subject prisoner be initiated, an action of good faith must be shown on the part of the Hearst family. This gesture is to be in the form of food to the needy and the unemployed, and to which the following instructions are directed to be followed to the letter. Hearst was to provide $17 worth of meats, vegetables, and dairy products to all people in California who had welfare cards, Social Security pension cards, food stamp cards, disabled veteran cards, medical cards, parole or probation papers, and bail release slips. The food was to be distributed in 7 of the biggest cities in the state, and there must be at least 5 stores as distribution points within each community. Even by the standards of the SLA's previous communications, the document was strange. It declared that a combat unit of the SLA had served an arrest warrant on Patricia Campbell Hearst. It ordered that she be maintained in adequate physical and mental condition. It warned that any attempt by authorities to rescue her or harm any SLA member would result in her execution. It ordered that all communications from the Court of the People be published in full in all newspapers and all other media. Failure to comply, it said, would endanger the prisoner's safety. The demand that followed was extraordinary. The food was to be distributed in 7 cities with at least 5 distribution points per community. The products were to be of top quality. The giveaway was to begin on February 19th and last 4 weeks. Suggested stores included Safeway and Mayfair. Randy Hearst was a newspaper publisher being asked to organize one of the largest food distribution programs in California history in order to keep his daughter alive. He started making calls. He held a press conference. He said he was going to do everything he could. The Weather Underground, still underground themselves, issued a statement. They expressed what they called grudging acknowledgement that the kidnapping had carried forward basic public questions and dramatized what many had come to understand, that it would be necessary to organize and destroy the racist and cruel system. They called for no harm to come to Hearst. They did not endorse the SLA. Nobody on the left endorsed the SLA. The organization that had declared itself the vanguard of American Revolution was, again, entirely alone. Patricia didn't know any of this. She knew only the voices of the people in the house. She knew the woman who brought her water and took her to the bathroom. She knew the voice of the man who lectured for hours and handed her a microphone and told her what to say to her parents. There were at least 3 other women and 2 other men, but otherwise she did not know who she was with. The closet door opened more frequently now. The world beyond it was expanding incrementally, the way that a controlled environment expands when the people controlling it decide the time is right. Patricia was being brought out to eat, to use the bathroom, to sit in the main spaces of the house under conditions that were still managed, still supervised, still bound by the understanding that her presence here was a secret that had to be maintained. She was no longer blindfolded. She was learning their names. The man with the authoritative voice, the one who had told her about the Geneva Convention, who had conducted the interrogation that lasted for days, was Sin Q. He was 30 years old, the oldest person in the house. He was black. He presided over the household, who needed to be understood as the leader and who enforced that understanding consistently. If something displeased him, everyone in the house knew it. He tolerated no criticism of himself or of the organization. The warm woman, the one who had drunk half the water before handing it to her, who had talked about the man she loved, who had dried Patricia's hair after her baths and combed it out and styled it with almost a sisterly intimacy, was Jolena. She was the good cop to Sin Q's bad one, and Patricia felt the pull of her warmth, even knowing somewhere that It was part of the same situation that had put her in the closet. Jelena had also been the woman wearing a frizzy blonde wig who had knocked at the door on Benvenue Avenue the night Patricia was taken. There was a young man, gentle in a way that distinguished him from the others, earnest, clearly educated, who sat outside her closet door and read to her. His name was Cajo. He gave her a copy of George Jackson's Blood in My Eye and talked about Vacaville, the prison, the conditions there, the ways the inmates were mistreated, the medical care that was withheld, and the humanity that was denied. He spoke with such intimate knowledge that Patricia initially assumed he had been incarcerated there himself. Cajo read to her the Communist Manifesto, Marighell's Manual for Guerrilla Warfare, Mao's Little Red Book. He had a favorite quotation that he returned to repeatedly, reciting it from memory, the care of someone who found it genuinely clarifying. All men must die, but death can vary in significance. The woman whose voice was urgent and ferocious, who wrote constantly and spoke about the revolution with the intensity of someone who had burned every bridge behind her getting here, she was Faiza. Her handwriting was in the documents Patricia was given to read. Her voice was in the lectures that came through the door alongside Sincu's. She was, Patricia came to understand, one of the people who had built the ideology she was now living inside. The reading material accumulated: the SLA Manifesto, Fanon, Mao, the canon of revolutionary literature that the organization had assembled as the curriculum of its closed room, now delivered to a 19-year-old woman in a closet with no contrasting text available, no other perspective to set beside it, no way to evaluate it against anything except itself. She knew by now the worst thing that could happen to her. It was not being hurt by the people in the house. It was the FBI finding the house. This had been made explicit and was reinforced regularly. If the authorities raided the house, she would be executed. This was not presented as a threat or a punishment, but as a logical consequence. The Geneva Convention worked both ways, she was told, and if the enemy came for their prisoner, the prisoner's fate was sealed. The people in the house were prepared to die. They had said so, clearly, more than once. If they were going to die, she was going to die with them. She was also reminded consistently of what her situation mirrored. Two men were in San Quentin, Bo and Osceola, and whatever they experienced there, she would experience here. If their conditions worsened, hers would worsen. Her fate was tied to theirs in the detailed way that the SLA's communiques had outlined, and the people in the house took that linkage seriously as a matter of revolutionary principle. She had no way to know what was happening to the men in San Quentin. She had no way to know what was happening anywhere outside this house. She knew what she was told, and what she was told was filtered through the people who had put her in the closet and who had, since then, been the entirety of her world. Randy Hearst was trying to figure out how to feed the poor of California. The SLA's demand had been logistically staggering: $17 worth of quality food for every person in the state holding a welfare card, a Social Security pension card, a food stamp card, a disabled veterans card, a medical card, or parole or probation papers, distributed across 7 cities with at least 5 distribution points per community, beginning February 19th. The cost would run into the millions. The organizational infrastructure required did not exist. He had approximately 1 week. A Hearst Company representative tracked down Peggy Mays, who had built and was running a network of food assistance programs in the Pacific Northwest. The Hearst organization, however, didn't trust a woman and asked who her supervisor was. She had no single supervisor to speak of, but the Washington Secretary of State, A. Ludlow Kramer, had taken a close interest in her work and lent it credibility. Within hours of being located, Mays and Kramer found themselves sitting across Randy Hearst's dining room table in Hillsborough. The question was direct. Could they build something of this scale, starting essentially from nothing, in a week? They agreed to try. The program was called People in Need, PIN. It was funded with Hearst money and organized by people with genuine experience moving food to communities in need. The SLA had been strategic in its demand, naming more than a dozen community and political organizations that were to participate in and monitor the distribution process. Some refused immediately. The Black Panthers wanted nothing to do with the organization that had murdered Marcus Foster, and the United Farm Workers declined for similar reasons. But others agreed to participate. The American Indian Movement, the United Prisoners Union, the Glide Memorial Church in San Francisco. Their involvement did something that Hearst money could not accomplish. It lent the program legitimacy, and in doing so gave the SLA an association with community organizations it had never earned on its own. The Reverend Jim Jones approached Mays on behalf of the People's Temple, arguing that his organization's established presence in San Francisco made them the natural choice to manage the food distribution. Mays, who was a native San Franciscan, declined his offer. The bookkeeper hired to manage PIN's finances was a woman named Sarah Jane Moore. 19 months later, she would attempt to assassinate President Gerald Ford outside a San Francisco hotel. Stephen Weed had been discharged from the hospital on February 9th and moved into a bedroom at the Hearst family home in Hillsborough. The FBI's special agent in charge of the San Francisco office, Charles Bates, made nightly visits to report on the investigation, which was to say its lack of progress. A lower-level agent lived on the premises full-time. His primary function was answering the family's telephone, which rang without stopping. Journalists, friends, strangers, people who claimed to know things they did not know. The psychics arrived. Catherine Hearst had a documented interest in the paranormal, and her daughter's kidnapping exacerbated it considerably. Patricia's sister Gina and her husband traveled to Los Angeles to consult Peter Hurkos, who billed himself as the world's foremost psychic and had appeared multiple times on The Tonight Show. Stephen referred to him as Swami Number 1. The FBI agents stored their revolvers on the mantelpiece in the library beneath a Renaissance ceramic. The investigation's command post was in the same room. The evidence was extensive. The leads it produced were almost none. Patricia was 20 miles away, learning names, reading George Jackson and Mao, listening to a young man recite a quotation about the significance of death through a closet door. She had been in captivity for 2 weeks. The closet door was opening more often now. The world beyond it was getting larger by degrees. She had turned 20 years old during the first 3 weeks of her captivity, though there was no reason to celebrate. Patricia was weak. Weeks of confinement and limited movement had taken a physical toll that surprised her. There were moments when she could barely walk to the bathroom without assistance, her legs uncertain beneath her. The people in the house noticed this and responded practically. They had her do calisthenics. The exercises were not optional, but they were not cruel either. The SLA needed her functional. They had invested something in keeping her alive and reasonably intact. 3 people had been assigned to her directly. Kajo, who read to her and talked about the prisons he had visited. Faiza, who spoke to Patricia least of the 3, but made one point repeatedly and with absolute conviction. The FBI was more dangerous to Patricia than the SLA was. Angelina, who dried Patricia's hair after her baths and sat cross-legged on the floor outside the closet door and talked like someone who needed connection as much as the person she was supposed to be guarding. Patricia had a different relationship with each of them. Cajo gave her a world to think about: the prisons, the conditions, the suffering of the people he had visited and read to and come to believe were the revolutionary class America was ignoring. He was earnest in a way that was hard to dismiss, and his knowledge was detailed and clearly genuine. Faiza spoke about the revolution as someone who had given everything to it and needed Patricia to understand that the giving had been necessary and right. Jelena talked about love and loss and the human texture of a life devoted to a cause. And the others, Sinkyu, Zoya, Tico, Yolanda, and one more woman, Gabi. She learned each of their names, though she had only seen a couple of their faces, and then in shadow. Slowly, almost without Patricia registering it as a process, she stopped being an abstraction to the people in the house. In short order, 3 of them told the others, "You're not going to believe this, but we like her." They had begun calling her Marie Antoinette in the early days, a commentary on her origins, her class, what she represented. Now they called her Tiny. She was just 5'2". Patricia, for her part, considered herself apolitical. Her family was not political, not really. She later explained that her father was a Republican who often voted Democrat, and her mother was a Dixiecrat who usually voted Republican. When Patricia first heard the SLA's rhetoric and beliefs, she had thought these people had a death wish. But she was a captive audience in the most literal sense, and the conversations kept coming, and she was frightened and weak, and these were the only human beings available to her. She began agreeing with the points they made. She began engaging with the reading material. She did this initially because it improved her situation. Agreement produced warmth, disagreement produced cold, but the line between strategic agreement and genuine absorption is not as clear as it sounds, particularly after weeks of having no other reality available. Then Senkyu presented her with a sawed-off shotgun. He told her she deserved a chance to defend herself. For 3 days, she received instructions on how to break it down, hold it, and fire it. Patricia had hunted with her father as a child and already understood the basics of how a shotgun worked. Senkyu also gave her a gas mask for use in case the FBI deployed tear gas in a raid. He returned repeatedly to the subject of the FBI, the raid that might come, the crossfire that would follow. He had told her on the night she arrived that the FBI was the real threat to her safety. The SLA was not going to kill her, he said, but she might very well die in an FBI raid. The Attorney General had acknowledged this publicly, had confirmed that a rescue operation was possible. Senkyu made sure Patricia knew about that statement. The message arrived from multiple directions and reinforced itself. The people in this house were not her enemies. The people coming to find her were. Senkyu also said other things. He still spoke of trading her for Bo and Osceola. At another point, he suggested she might face a choice when this was over: join the SLA or be executed. He framed it with a rough warmth that was disorienting. "We've kind of gotten to like you," he said, "so we don't really want to kill you if we don't have to. Think about it." The first People in Need distributions were scheduled for February 22nd across 4 locations: underserved neighborhoods in San Francisco, Richmond, East Palo Alto, and East Oakland. Assembling the food had been the hard part. Moving it to people who needed it would prove to be something else. People began gathering at the distribution sites well before dawn. By the time the pin trucks finally departed the warehouse in early afternoon, enormous crowds had been waiting for hours in each city. 3 of the 4 distributions were disorganized but manageable. Oakland was not. The Oakland site was anchored by a well-known local organization. Thousands of people had lined the surrounding blocks since morning, spilling into the street. When the first truck finally arrived in the afternoon, it found its path blocked by the crowd. The driver honked. Someone threw a bottle. What followed consumed the afternoon. Trucks unable to move, food being pulled from vehicles by hand, heavier items turned into projectiles as the scene deteriorated. More than 20 people required hospital treatment. Those who secured food were followed by others who took it from them. The trucks were stripped within an hour, while thousands who had waited all day left with nothing. The entire sequence was captured on television cameras. One woman, injured when debris came through her car window, filed a lawsuit against Hearst, Penn, and the city. Randy Hearst called his attorney that night, looking for anything that might salvage the program. Subsequent distributions went more smoothly after the Delancey Street Foundation provided security at the sites, though a truck carrying food intended for thousands was still hijacked the following week. The SLA was not satisfied regardless. A tape released the day before the first distribution had already declared the $2 million commitment an insult. Pocket change from a family whose foundation was legally obligated to give away $3 million annually anyway. SingQ demanded an additional $4 million, bringing the total ask to $6 million, and made explicit that Patricia's continued captivity was directly tied to whether that figure was met. On March 6th, Governor Reagan was asked about the People in Need program at a private Republican gathering in Washington. His response? That it was a shame there couldn't be an outbreak of botulism, drew an audible reaction even from the sympathetic room. The people standing in those distribution lines were the poorest residents of his own state and had no involvement in the circumstances that had created the program. Reagan also announced around this time that California would not, under any circumstances, allow the release of Russell Little and Joe Ramiro to become part of any negotiation. The two objectives the SLA had kidnapped Patricia Hearst to achieve were both, by March of 1974, producing outcomes the organization had not prepared for. Penn ultimately cost Randy Hearst more than $2 million. Roughly 100,000 people received food. Emily Harris would later say that SLA members had positioned themselves in the food lines to observe the community's response firsthand. What they witnessed, the scale of need, the chaos, the violence, the trucks emptied in minutes while thousands walked away with nothing, was either proof of everything the manifesto had argued about the conditions of the oppressed, or evidence that a food distribution program organized under the threat of a kidnapping was not, in practice, a revolutionary act. Inside the house in Daly City, Patricia was doing calisthenics and holding a sawed-off shotgun and having long conversations with the people who had kidnapped her and now called her by nicknames. She had been in captivity for more than a month. The 9 days of silence that followed Randy Hearst's rejection of the demand for an additional $4 million were the longest gap in communications since the kidnapping. No tapes, no communiques, no word about Patricia's condition. The Hearst family and the FBI waited. The public waited. The silence itself became news. When the SLA finally broke it on March 9th, they did so with something more elaborately produced than anything they had previously released. A local radio station received a call directing them to a package taped to the toilet tank in the women's restroom of a San Francisco restaurant. Inside was a tape with 3 distinct voices, a production designed to project organizational depth, the image of a functioning revolutionary army rather than a handful of people in an unfurnished house in Daly City. The first voice was Jelena, Angela Atwood. She introduced herself as a general in the Symbionese Liberation Army. She made the SLA's case with theatrical conviction. Patricia spoke next. She said the media had been constructing a false image of her father as a man who had exhausted every option. She said she was tired of being portrayed as a helpless, innocent girl abducted by lunatic radicals. She said she was a strong woman and resented being used that way. She said she had been reading George Jackson's Blood in My Eye and was beginning to understand what he meant when he wrote about fascism in America. She was working from an outline. Her voice on this tape was different from the earlier recordings. People who listened carefully noticed without being able to fully articulate. She sounded less frightened, more present, more certain of what she was saying. Sing-Q spoke last, calling on all oppressed people to arm themselves while they still had the chance. Stephen Weed had become, by this point, the object of something approaching universal contempt among everyone connected to the case. The Hearst family, the FBI, the journalists covering the story, and eventually, Patricia herself. Catherine Hearst said plainly that no one would have carried her daughter off if there had been a real man present. When one reporter asked Weed whether he would be willing to take Patricia's place as a hostage, he said it depended on the circumstances and that he wouldn't rule it out. Weed also met with Colston Westbrook during this period. Westbrook laughed at the allegations of CIA and FBI connections to the SLA's origins, but he did not deny them. The People in Need program was winding down. Hearst announced he was finished funding it. Reagan had made clear that Little and Ramiro's release was not negotiable. The 2 things the kidnapping had been designed to accomplish were both definitively foreclosed. Tico did not know what came next. He was the one who first suggested the food giveaway idea, and for a brief time that had felt like purpose. But the food program was over, and no one in the house seemed interested in it anymore, and Tico's attention was not built for the static, waiting quality of life in an unfurnished safe house with the curtains drawn. He'd barely known these people when he joined them, and now they were all moving toward what appeared to be a confrontation with the FBI, and he kept asking himself whether that was really the only way this ended. He wanted nothing to do with Patricia. He made a deliberate choice not to let her become a person to him, because he understood that the role she served was easier to maintain if she stayed abstract. Yolanda had no such ambivalence. Yolanda had a ferocity her husband lacked and a greater willingness to regard Patricia as a potential casualty of war rather than as a human being who happened to be present. Yolanda, too, wondered what the plan was. She looked around at the people she had joined and could not find a clear answer. There wasn't one. There was, however, a growing tension in the household. The SLA operated on a theory of collective living that extended to the most intimate aspects of daily life. They held that exclusive relationships were a form of bourgeois possessiveness, incompatible with revolutionary commitment. Sex, like food and shelter, was understood as a collective need to be met collectively. Almost everyone in the house was involved with someone they had not arrived with. Yolanda had written to her parents in Illinois that she and Tico had restructured their relationship so that it no longer confined either of them, but she was involved with someone she found deeply fulfilling. About a month into Patricia's captivity, one of the women in the house came to the group with a question on Patricia's behalf. Patricia wanted to be with one of the men. Should the group permit it? The question divided them. Jelena and Faiza, who were closest to both parties, said it was not the group's place to interfere with what two adults decided between themselves. Tico, Yolanda, Zoya, and Gabi objected, the point being obvious. Patricia was there because she had been kidnapped. And whatever either of them chose, the group was exposing itself to serious legal and moral consequences if she later characterized the encounter differently. Senkyu sided with Jelena and Faiza. That evening, Kajo went to the closet. Afterward, he talked to Patricia about a woman named Heidi Tamara Bunky Biter. She had been born in Argentina to German parents, had grown up in East Germany, had become a musician and a linguist, and an intelligence operative of considerable skill. She had infiltrated Bolivian high society to prepare the ground for Che Guevara's guerrilla campaign. She had died in an ambush in 1967 at the age of 29, weapons in hand, fighting for a cause she had chosen completely and without reservation. Her revolutionary name was Tanya. Kajo told Patricia that this was what she should be called. But the name Tanya had belonged to someone else first, to Robin Steiner, Osceola's former girlfriend. Steiner had moved through the SLA's earliest formation, who had left the organization after the Foster assassination rather than follow it any further, and who was now, at this very moment, sitting in Florida being interviewed by an Oakland police detective about everything she knew. But the symbology of the name Tanya was too precious to discard. So now it was being offered to Patricia Hearst, if she stayed. Something had shifted in the house on Northridge Drive, and the people who lived there were beginning to notice it. Patricia had started saying something that none of them had expected to hear. Not once, in the way that a person in a difficult situation might say almost anything, but repeatedly, in different conversations with different people, in a way that eventually stopped sounding like frustration and started sounding like something else. I don't want to go home. Jelena heard it first and initially set it aside, assumed it was a reaction to the chaos outside, the media encampment in Hillsborough, the awkward public performance of her family's anguish. But Patricia kept saying it. She spoke about Stephen Weed with open contempt now. She spoke about her mother with a bitterness that had an ideological shape to it. The ties to the life she had been living on Benvenue Avenue were loosening in ways that were visible to the people watching her most closely. Jelena and Faiza brought this to the others. They made the case carefully. This was a young woman who had chosen Berkeley, who had made unconventional choices before any of this happened, who had been reading and listening and engaging for weeks in a way that had moved from compliance to something that looked like genuine curiosity. Maybe, they said, she really could be one of them. Senkyu was interested, not in Patricia as a person, but in what her joining would represent. A propaganda achievement of a kind the SLA had never managed. The kidnapped victim who chose to stay. He turned the idea over and decided it was worth pursuing. He called it a coup. Actually, he said coup. There were conditions. Patricia would have to convince each member of the group individually that she belonged. The vote would have to be unanimous. If a single person said no, the answer was no. Tico said no, or close to it. He sat at the foot of the Murphy bed in the new apartment on Golden Gate Avenue. The SLA had moved, folding Patricia into a 30-gallon garbage can for the drive into the city, finding a 2-bedroom apartment just over a mile from FBI headquarters, and listened to Patricia make her case. She told him her old life was gone. Her mother was a drunken reactionary. Her father had failed her. Stephen Weed was a clown and a parasite. She said she wanted to stay. Tico tried to talk her out of it. He was not sentimental about Patricia and had no particular interest in her as a person, but he was practical in a way that some of the others were not. As long as she was with them, he said, the group was a target. If she went home, she saved her own life, and the SLA members had some chance of eventually fading from view. Patricia was not persuaded. Tico eventually gave up. Sin presented it to her plainly. The War Council had decided she could join them if she wanted to, or she could go home. Patricia has stated that she believed this was not a real choice, that the option of going home was not genuine, that she knew too much to ever be safely released, and that the offer was a test she had to pass. The surviving SLA members maintained that the choice was real, that she could have gone home, that she chose to stay. This disagreement has never been resolved. What is not disputed is what she said. She told Sin-Q she wanted to join. He told her what it meant. She could never go back to her old way of life. She would be an urban guerrilla fighting for the people. She said yes. As General Field Marshal, I welcome you. You are now a guerrilla fighter and a soldier in the Symbionese Liberation Army. Kajou gave her a gift. An archaeologist friend had found 2 small charms on a dig in Mexico, he said, and he had kept them. He braided and waxed a rope for one of them and gave it to Patricia to wear around her neck. He made a matching rope for the other charm and wore it himself. 2 small objects, identically prepared, connecting 2 people who had found each other inside a situation that neither of them had chosen in the same way or for the same reasons. She took the charm and tied the rope around her neck.
Days later, according to Hearst, the door of the closet opened, and Sin-Q stood there, and he said, "Take off your clothes, Patty." And he stepped inside. Bill and Emily Harris both deny that DeFries had sex with Patricia Hearst. Thank you for listening to House on Fire, Patty Hearst, the SLA, and the Seduction of Revolution. This is H. Allegra Lansing. This is a story about a country at war with itself, and about what happens when a generation's fury collapses into the worst possible reaction. The Symbionese Liberation Army did not fail because the injustice they saw wasn't real. They failed because they chose violence, and violence is the one form of resistance that entrenched power already knows how to defeat. It has been defeating it for centuries. Everyone swept up in the movement would pay a cost beyond measure, even an heiress to the nation's most powerful media empire. On the next episode of House on Fire, after 59 days in a closet, Patricia Hearst is offered a choice: go home or stay and fight. 52 years later, we still don't fully understand that choice, or the decisions that followed it. A tape recording, photographs in a beret with a rifle, security camera footage of a young woman holding an automatic weapon inside a San Francisco bank, apparently protecting the people who dragged her out of her apartment 2 months before. Is she still Patricia Campbell Hearst? Has she become Tanya? Is there even a difference anymore? The country thought it knew the answer the morning those photographs ran. This webcast is based on historical records, contemporary reporting, and archival research. All writing and most narration by yours truly. Theme music is Red Shift by The Grey Room. with density and time. Additional audio recordings by members of the Symbionese Liberation Army.